Okay, we're back, and I wanted to continue what I was saying about the Hulk Hogan TNA segment versus the Bret Hart WWE segment. Now, WWE brought out Bret Hart like right at 9 o'clock, like at the beginning of the show, and that was pretty smart. So they get the audience right away there. They get the audience hooked. But then after the Bret Hart segment, it's kind of a letdown. Where, okay, you saw pretty much the gist of what was going to happen. You were somewhat disappointed by the Shawn Michaels incident. Because that's where the real heat would come from. I mean, yeah, there's heat between Bret and Vince, but Vince isn't a wrestler. Okay? What is Vince going to do against Bret Hart? Whereas Shawn Michaels could maybe, I don't know, super kick Bret Hart. But that didn't happen. Instead, we got a handshake. So that's kind of a letdown. So the audience is going to turn over to TNA, which they did, to watch Hulk Hogan's debut. Now, the segment that Hulk Hogan was in, the hour segment, did a 1.44, which is down from the first hour of 1.69. Not down by a lot, but it still is down. But the 15 minutes that Hogan was in the ring did a 1.88. Okay? So therefore, that's the highest segment ever in TNA history. Which means that even the show, other segments of the show, like the ending of the show, which was really exciting, didn't even get that high of a rating. Okay, 1.88. Compare that to the overall rating of Raw, which was a 3.37. Okay? That's not even in the same league. Which means if TNA is even going to hope to get close to Raw in the ratings, something drastic is going to happen. If you can't even get higher than a 1.88 with Hulk Hogan's debut, how the hell are you going to get anywhere near 3.37? All right? So, having said that, what do we know about the rating of Bret Hart's return segment? I would like to know that. But let's continue reading. And it says the least watched segment of the show came at the end of the second hour with a 1.16 quarter hour rating with the Pope versus Wolf match and AJ Styles interview. So I guess it kind of turns out that people weren't that interested in watching the Pope versus Desmond Wolf on TNA or the AJ Styles interview, which is kind of peculiar because after the Hulk Hogan segment, people would either be hooked or they would have seen enough and turn away. So it appears that people had seen enough and turned away. Or they just weren't impressed with this guy, Pope and Wolf, even though those guys are both good wrestlers. Maybe they're not very popular. Unfortunately, that's what happened. Because 1.16 is a lot lower than 1.88 with the Hulk Hogan segment. So that segment went up against DX versus Jericho in the Big Show. Yeah. DX and Jericho versus Jericho in the Big Show carries more impact than Pope versus Wolf and AJ Styles interview. People were probably more interested in seeing DX than Pope and Wolf. And that's the reason why I think Pope and Wolf did such a poor rating. Not because they're not interesting, more likely because people rather watch DX versus Jericho in the Big Show. So take nothing away from those guys and take nothing away from AJ Styles. AJ Styles also went on to wrestle in the main event, so we're going to figure out what the rating was on that. Let's continue reading. The third hour of Impact dropped to a 1.22 rating. The range of quarter hour ratings was between 1.17 and 1.30. Okay, so the third hour did a 1.22, which is the worst. Okay, so it went from a 1.69 to a 1.44 to a 1.22. All right, the biggest drop. Well, actually, you know what? They're both kind of the same. The drops. So it just kept dropping almost the same each hour. So it's not like you can really say that any hour was particularly worse than the other. But the third hour peaked in the final 15 minutes of the show with a 1.30. Okay, that's expected because the AJ Styles versus Kurt Angle match was phenomenal. That could have been a pay-per-view match. It should have been a pay-per-view match. And we'll probably get to see some kind of a rematch at Genesis with a gimmick, like a cage or who knows. But the whole thing with Mick Foley and the NWO guys and Ric Flair and Eric Bischoff, that was pretty interesting. And then that was a peak moment, and I think people were really tuned in for the conclusion of the show. But we didn't really get to see anything big. Like Hall and Nash proceeded to beat down, and X-Pac proceeded to beat down on Mick Foley while Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff kind of stood there and watched. We didn't really get, what am I trying to say? We didn't really see Hulk Hogan's motives there. We didn't really see where's Hulk Hogan's head at. Is he going to be the badass NWO guy? Or is he going to be the red, white, and blue hero, Mr. Nice Guy? I think all that is kind of like part of the past now. Hulk Hogan wants to reinvent himself as kind of this gray character who, he's all about drama. It's not necessarily that he's a bad guy or that he's a good guy. He's just got his own motivation going. But it will be interesting to see how this storyline plays out between Hogan and Mick Foley. And also Ric Flair. I want to know what Ric Flair was doing when he was just standing there looking at Kurt Angle and AJ Styles. Maybe he wants to challenge one of them. Maybe he wants to make them a proposition or become their manager. Personally, I would rather not see Ric Flair wrestle. But who knows? TNA really could surprise us with some interesting storyline there with Ric Flair. But Ric Flair didn't do much at all. I mean, he had 2 brief appearances where he just, you saw him on screen and that was pretty much it. So in that respect, it was kind of a letdown.